Welcome to the Bully Pulpit Show. I'm Mark Joseph, and our guest today is the author, James Scott Bell. James, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Now, James, you're the author of how many books now?
Oh, probably 19 or 20. I've lost count.
Well, you've written so many books you've lost count. Well, that's a good sign. Well, tell us about, first of all, writing, being an author, and also talk about your latest book, The Whole Truth.
The Whole Truth is a thriller from Zondervan, and I wanted to write a book this time about a dark secret from the past that haunts somebody in the present. So my protagonist is a lawyer. He's struggling. He's got something that is really holding him down. It's guilt from something that happened in his childhood. His older brother was kidnapped right out of the same room that they were in, and he blames himself. Now, 25 years later, he gets a chance to represent a guy who claims to be that long-lost brother. And that's how the story starts.
Now, your 19th or 20th book, you often write about legal topics.
Right.
What is that about? Your background as an attorney?
Right. I try to keep that quiet, but yes, I was a practicing lawyer for several years, went to USC Law School. Before that, I was a film major at UC Santa Barbara, and so I've always loved film, I've loved writing. And I try to put those two things together, the writing and the legal background.
Now, one of my favorite book of yours is, of course, Deadlock. Walk us through that one, because that's a great example of your combining your legal skills, your writing, and even your filmmaking, because it's a potential film, I think.
Well, I love the Supreme Court. I love the law as an enterprise. And back then, when I was thinking about writing a book about the Supreme Court, I tried to think of a subject matter. Sandra Day O'Connor was still on the court, and of course she was a swing vote. She was kind of right in the middle between what people would call the liberal wing and the conservative wing, and how she would decide very often was the deciding vote. And you know, there are many controversial decisions. I started to wonder what would happen if someone in that position had a complete change of philosophy, both legal and how they looked at the law, how they looked at life. And so I came up with this idea of having a woman Supreme Court justice who has an incredible near-death experience that changes her whole philosophy from being atheistic to maybe saying, hey, maybe there's something more religious going on, something more theistic going on in the universe, and it changes her outlook, which of course starts to change the voting and throws everybody in Washington into disarray, because now this is somebody they could count on. As you know, when lawyers take cases up to the Supreme Court, they count the votes. They say, I think I can count on this person, this person, this person. And then they shape their argument that way. So it was kind of a fun concept to use.
Does that ever happen? Has that ever happened in your research, where a person has had that kind of a switcheroo where they go to the other side of their philosophical
I'm not
end?
sure that it's happened so instantaneously, but perhaps over the course of time. You know, there have been judges who've been appointed that some people say, well, we can count on him to be such and such a judge, but over many years, he starts to evolve or change. And I think that's happened, much to the consternation of some of the people that appointed that person. So it has happened, yes.
Well, let's talk Supreme Court for a little bit then.
Right.
You're a big fan of the Supreme Court. What is it that interests you about it?
Well, the whole idea that we are a nation of law, and the Supreme Court is there to interpret the Constitution. And over the course of our history, how they have grappled with some of the major problems of our culture and our society and tried to resolve them. And, 150 years ago, the court was, tremendously different from what it is today. In some ways good, in some ways bad. I mean, they were upholding slavery and the Dred Scott decision and so forth, and yet they were very much attuned to the religious underpinnings, the Christian underpinnings of the culture. And so those two dynamics started to, I think, go against each other. And over the course of time, the court has gone one way and then the other, and it's a very controversial evolution for some people.
I think it is fascinating how justices evolve. You've had appointees like Byron White, appointed by Kennedy. I don't know if he was always conservative, but he went pretty conservative toward the end. You've had people like John Paul Stevens, appointed by Ford, Harry Blackmun by Nixon, who went the other way. It seems that it usually goes one way, though. Don't you think that there are more justices who go liberal than the other way around? Or not? Is it a 50-50 equation?
No, I don't know. The sense I get is, well, it also depends how it's phrased. I mean, if a judge tends to go what we would call on a more liberal plane, they're probably called progressive, and people say, well, they've grown. But if they go the other way, I think the tendency might be to say, well, they're regressing and so forth. It's just how it's characterized. But no, I think that anytime a judge gets into a position like that where they're making those big decisions, I think most of them take it very seriously. They love the law. They're sworn to uphold it. But then dynamics take place, and people are human too.
What kind of factors influence a judge? Family? I mean, the old joke is that certain justices want to be accepted at parties and the social circuit in Washington, D.C. How much of that is true, and how much of it is influenced by the law and the philosophy, and how much of it is by the surroundings?
Well, I'm not that much of an insider on the whole judicial culture, but I've known several judges, and I've liked them, no matter what their philosophy is. I've had personal friends who are judges, and they are human beings. I mean, one of the things that we have to understand about anything in our legal system is that it's run by human beings. And there are factors that come into play. Some of them perhaps we wish didn't. But people are human, and I think one of the keys to being an effective lawyer is to understand those dynamics and be able to use them without exploiting them or without being underhanded about it. But you have to take it into consideration. When judges, when lawyers go to the Supreme Court, they have been coached and trained to know how certain justices will react to certain questions. And so there is personality involved.
Now, of your 12.5 books, how many are involved with the legal system?
Most of them have a legal thriller theme to them. The courtroom is a natural place for drama, and it's a great place to focus attention on personal problems, personal issues, faith issues, and of course it's just interesting, and it is witnessed by all the legal shows you see on TV. So I just find it a natural canvas.
And what sorts of issues do you really have to focus on? What is different in this type of writing versus other writing that doesn't involve justice in the courts and so forth?
Well, I think dramatically speaking, it's pretty much the same. When you write a thriller and when you write suspense, you're doing certain things to keep readers reading through the pages. But the legal system provides so many opportunities for plotting and for plot twists and so forth. You have law enforcement involved. You have any kind of witness involved. You have judges and you have lawyers. You have that whole panoply of things. And so it's just a great palette to be able to select from.
Okay, we'll come back in just a moment with our guest, James Scott Bell. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Bully Pulpit Show. I'm Mark Joseph, and our guest once again is the author James Scott Bell. Jim, you've got a number of ideas percolating, I know, for future books. This is your full-time gig, unlike some of us who write books, for fun. This is what you do. What do you have cooking right now? What are you thinking? What are you writing right now? And what are you imagining right now?
Well, I am currently working on the second book in a series that started with this novel, Try Dying. This is a series character, a lawyer, who is kind of forced to go out on the streets and solve things in a way he's not trained to do through a set of circumstances. It's an ongoing series. It's got a great collective of characters, and that's really what I'm thinking about. I'm planning that series out, and I'm doing book 2 and starting to think about book 3.
And what is it like for you? What's the writing process like? What do you, in a typical day, how often do you write? When do you write? Take us through that.
Well, I usually write in the morning, usually at my table at Starbucks. I have my table at Starbucks, and I'm very upset when people take that table. But now I get there, and I usually start my writing day there.
What time?
Oh, probably between 7 and 7:30, and I do a lot of writing there, and then I go to an office and I do some writing there. I also write a legal book and publish that. I've been doing that for many years, so that's a pretty full day. Part of the time that I spend in my writing day is with the creative part. I'll be thinking about the next project. I'll be coming up with ideas, scene ideas, character ideas, and so forth. And then I'm always working on a current project, and then editing another. So it's pretty constant.
And what's your output? How many books are you producing at what rate?
Well, I think as I look back, it's probably about 2 books a year. And I also have written some how-to books on writing for Writer's Digest books, so I like to help other writers as well. So it's been a pretty productive last 10 years.
Now, fiction, nonfiction. So you do both. You also write nonfiction.
The nonfiction is pretty much related to writing. I was the fiction columnist for Writer's Digest magazine for a while. I've done articles for them. I teach at writers' conferences. I like to help young writers. So.
Walk us through character development. How do you develop these characters? Are these people that you knew, that you've met in life? Are they just people you're making up as you go along?
No, I want to avoid lawsuits, so I usually make characters up.
Because you're a lawyer.
Well, you anticipate these things. So yeah, you can draw from life characteristics and so forth. But really, when I'm starting a book, and I usually start with a plot idea and a situation. Then I want to start to people it with characters. And characters develop and evolve. They don't come instantaneously. You usually just kind of add things, subtract things, magnify things as you go along in the writing process. So I like the characters to take on life, start to breathe on their own, and sometimes surprise me. In fact, that happened with Deadlock. We were talking about that. I have a character there who I was sure was going to live and ended up dying. And I said, how did that happen? I didn't allow that, but it happened. In a book I wrote that called No Legal Grounds, I have a character in there, the wife of the main character, and I had planned for her to leave town, but she wouldn't leave. So you just go with it. And that's fun when characters start to take on lives of their own.
What is the dynamic there? It's almost like they're not refusing to obey their creator. What's actually going on?
Yeah, novelists will talk about this. They'll say, my character sort of took over the story. Now, not literally, of course, you're not possessed, but what happens is when you're writing and all of this creative energy is going through your body and your mind, then there's a dynamic there. Things are happening. Stephen King refers to this as the boys in the basement, like the subconscious writer's mind. They're working and they send things up. And so that's what's happening. And it's fun when that happens because you know that there's a living, breathing, natural development that's happening. And you kind of go with it and test it and see if you like it, and you're still ultimately in control.
Michael Jackson once talked about the songwriting process, like he felt like he was plucking songs that were already in the universe. Do you see it that way, or do you see yourself as a co-creator with a supreme being, or what's the creative process?
Well, I mean, I believe that creativity and all of that's a gift. I mean, we're designed in certain ways, and God has gifted us in certain ways. And my job really, though, is to go out and do the hard work of creativity. I think that's work. I don't wait for inspiration. If I did, I don't know that I'd write anything.
So the book is not out there in the universe?
I don't think so. I mean, at least I haven't found that repository yet. It'd be a lot easier to just select the next one from the shelf. But no, it's a creative process. You work at it. I think one of the things that I learned early on was that writing is actual putting the words down on the page. I try to write every day, putting the words down, write a certain number of words. And that both inspires me and forces me to work on those days when I don't feel necessarily inspired. I think you have to do that if you're a professional writer.
Do you actually enjoy the process of writing?
I do. It's hard work sometimes. It's frustrating sometimes. But I enjoy it. I love it. And I think most people who do write, at least if they're good at it, they'll say they enjoy it. They're frustrated too. I mean, it's hard work. Your standards constantly are raised in your own mind. And so you're ultimately never truly satisfied with anything you write, but you hope that you just keep getting better and better.
Now, if you were to start a book tomorrow, when would the first draft be finished in a typical
Probably
scenario?
4 months or so for a first draft.
And then what happens after that?
Then you submit it to your editor, and there are editing notes that you get back, and you revise according to those notes, and then you send it in, and there's another set of more minor revisions. It's about those 3 iterations, and then finally you get one last look to, correct any small things. But yeah, there's an editing process that follows.
Now, you must have some James Scott Bell fans out there who follow your work. What is that like, and are these people that, is it the same people that are buying the whole series, or do you have new folks coming in all the time? What is that like?
Well,
Do you even know?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there's any one answer to that. I mean, yes, I have loyal readers, people who read me for many years and email me. I have an e-newsletter and keep in touch with people. And then I get new readers, and I love that when I get people that say, oh, I just read this book, and well, now I'm going to go read your other books. So that's fun. It's all part of the process. And I like to meet readers. Sometimes I'll do book signings and so forth. And it's gratifying to know that there are people reading your books.
Now, for somebody who's read through all 19, 20 of them, is there an overarching theme in your work that pops up from time to time? Have you noticed it? Do people say it?
I think it's the quest for justice. I think in both the personal and the professional realm. I think that people are looking for that completeness, that satisfaction, that wholeness that comes from finding justice. I think that's sort of the theme, and that can play itself out in many ways. But that's probably, I think, the through line for most of my books.
Do the books sort of conclude with justice? Do you ever leave injustice hanging or leave the outcome hanging?
Most of the time I want a resolution in the book, but that's not necessary for the theme. It's possible that if you have a book that ends with injustice still hanging over, that it indicates to people, well, wait a minute, that's wrong, something is wrong here. It still conveys that theme because people are upset about it. So that can happen, but most of the time I'm looking for some kind of resolution, some kind of wholeness that the characters are looking for, because I think a lot of people who read are looking for that in their own lives.
So what is the, in detective dramas or crime dramas, Columbo, whatever it is, there's always the resolution and the justice. What is it about human beings that we want that sense of justice and resolution?
Well, I think we're looking for that. We're looking for that in our lives. I mean, the world seems like a scary place, a dark place. And people want to feel some kind of security in that. I think that's the popularity of mystery fiction and thrillers and detective fiction and police procedurals and so forth. Because there is a sense that those people are out there in this dark world and they're solving the problem. And in that way, vicariously, a reader can participate in that.
Okay, we'll come back in just a moment with the author James Scott Bell. Stay tuned. We're back with James Scott Bell on the Pulpit Show. We're continuing our conversation, and I'm wondering if it's a sense of control that people who feel their lives are out of control, this is a good way to sort of tidy up things, and the justice. Does that factor into this at all?
I think so. I think that's part of it. People maybe sense that they don't have as much control over their lives as they once did, and reading fiction that ties things up, that offers an answer or gives them the possibility of an answer, I think is satisfying to them. Yeah.
Okay, well, take us through your background. You mentioned the screenwriting, the legal background. Also, specifically, what were the authors that really formed you and formed your interest in this area?
Well, I think the Hardy Boys books when I was a kid.
Of course.
Learned how to write cliffhangers that way. Every chapter was a cliffhanger, and you had to keep reading. I loved that feeling of creating that, and it took me a lot of years to figure out how to do that. That's the craft of writing. But I always loved movies as well, and I was a film major in college. And so I wanted to do something in either filmmaking, screenwriting. I was an actor for a while. Just loved that art form. And so I actually, out of college, I did a lot of acting. And then when I got married, married an actress, this beautiful actress, and I thought, well, you know what? We need to have at least one steady income. So I went to law school. But I always had that desire to write, and eventually turned to writing screenplays and taught myself how to do that. And that was really good training for the novels, because you learn to write visually, you learn to write in scenes and in dialogue, and so that I think has been a help in the writing of the fiction.
How is it different? How is a screenplay writing different from
Well, a
books?
screenplay is a blueprint for a film, and so you have to think and be able to write in this sort of film jargon and make things happen crisply, know how to communicate visually, know how to communicate the sense of a scene without a lot of description, which you can dawdle over in a novel, and how to write crisp dialogue, and how to know when to end Act 1 and get into Act 2, how to keep a film from dragging, and so forth. So those are all skills that you learn over the years.
What about influential authors in your life, in your formative years especially?
Boy, I just
Besides the Hardy Boys.
yes, a lot of other. Raymond Chandler, of course, a major influence, one of the great American writers. When I was in college, I loved Hemingway and Soroyan and John Steinbeck. And then the hard-boiled writers, the Dashiell Hammett and Ross MacDonald, John D. MacDonald, great storytellers, people who could really tell a great story. That always was what grabbed me first, was the ability to tell a story.
Are you also a good storyteller? Do you sit around the house and tell stories to your family, or is that not necessarily...
Sounds like I should have a Cracker Barrel and a big pot-bellied stove.
Sit around Dad as he tells the stories of the good old days?
I don't know. I like to tell stories. I like to relate things that happen, and I don't know. The storytelling ability I'm try to put on the page, and so maybe that translates to real life.
What is the importance and the function of storytellers in society, and have we lost, I mean, this has been going on for centuries from the beginning of time. Have we lost something, and what is that role? What is the importance of it?
Actually, I think storytellers are more important than ever. I think we are a storytelling culture. As you know, we're moving into more of a post-literate culture. People are more visually oriented. Critical thinking skills, which used to be championed and taught and sort of took the lead in public policy matters and so forth, even those things aren't being emphasized. People are telling stories. Look at the presidential campaign. It's all about narratives. John Edwards is a son of a mill worker, and Barack Obama, what a great story he is about the American story, which I think is, American history is great. And then, the Republican candidates all have their narratives. John McCain is the war hero and so forth. That's how they're relating. When I was a trial lawyer, that's how we would relate to the jury. It wasn't strictly through the logic. It was, what is the story? Who are the compelling characters? So we are a storytelling culture. I think people who write fiction, who write books, and increasingly people who write nonfiction and political speeches are storytellers.
Now, as a writer, as an author, you must be concerned, though, as people are reading less. They're buying books, but I'm not sure they're reading, the studies say. They're watching TV, they're going on YouTube. Does that concern you, and or do you have to make a career shift at some point into, say, screenwriting or filmmaking?
Well, I still screenwrite, and I still like visuals. So that wouldn't be a hard transition to make, but I love books, and I think books will still be around. I think you have to learn how to write for the audience, though. You have to learn to write. That's why I think screenwriting helped me, is that I write visually. You can't write like George Eliot anymore. You can't write like Dickens anymore. You have to be able to write in a way that people can immediately get into a story. You have to grab them from page one and carry them through.
But what are the implications of writing for basically an ADD culture? We have kids who are growing up that are used to that's right, are used to multitasking. They're reading, they're listening to a song. I mean, do you have to work harder to capture their attention and maintain their attention?
Well, I think that enterprise of capturing readers really is, it's something that you always have to hone. Now, what I say when I teach writing is you have to start with line one and grab somebody and then learn how not to let them go. So if I have that ADD reader browsing in a bookstore, picks up one of my books, opens it to page one and starts reading, I need to grab them then. And then they're going to keep reading through the end of chapter one, and then when they get to that end, I want to say, wait a minute. They want to continue reading. So, yeah, I think you have to understand that people are divided. They have different things calling for their attention. Yeah.
Do you have any sort of mechanisms for keeping in touch with your readers? Do you listen to your kids' opinions, your wife? I mean, how do you stay in touch with the reactions to people to your work?
Well, the first reader of any of my manuscripts is my wife, because she's really sharp, and she will tell me if something's not working. I often make that very painful for her. It's very annoying to be married to a writer. And imagine being married to a writer and a lawyer. Imagine those two things together. So she's Saint Cindy, that's what we call her. Anyway, she reads my stuff, she edits it, she's very good at that. And then, of course, I depend on my editors too. So I listen and try to shape things a little bit, but mainly I'm trying to communicate something that's coming from inside me that concerns me, a story that interests me, and that's really where it starts. And now I get a lot of reader email and
suggestions for story ideas?
Well, sometimes you'll get those. Every now and then, something happened to me, will you write this story? But readers who comment, and mostly it's positive, because I think that's mostly what you get. But every now and then somebody will be critical of something, and I try to listen, and if it's a valid thing, I'll think about it.
Now, you touch on sort of the three topics that are the untouchables: politics, religion, and the law. I mean, often those themes are running through your work. How do you deal in particular with religion, and thinking well, you want to cast a wide net for your readers, I'm sure. How do you deal with issues of religion and not alienate, but still talk about whatever you want to talk about?
Well, I think the key is always that the characters have to be true. The characters have to be real. They cannot be mouthpieces for a particular point of view. And if the characters are real, then the readers will identify with them. And I want to show people who are not cardboard cutouts, who are not perfect. And I think that's what readers identify with. They identify with people who are struggling just like themselves. And once you establish that, and you have a convincing plot and narrative, then people will go along with that. So that's my job as a writer, because if I am not conveying real characters, then the readers, I'm going to lose the readers. They're not going to follow along. They have to be real.
And what kind of feedback do you get from readers, in particular about religious issues that you bring up? Do you have people who are offended by something or affirmed by something?
Oh, I don't know that people are necessarily offended by anything. Every now and then you might have somebody who has a different take on a particular issue, And they'll say, well, I don't think you handled that issue perhaps correctly. And then most of the time I'm responding, well, these are characters. This is how it happens in life. And I still try to make it real and resolve in a way that's understandable.
Okay. Okay, we'll be back in just a moment with James Scott Bell. Stay tuned. And we're back on the Bully Pulpit Show with James Scott Bell, whose latest books are The Whole Truth and Try Dying. I wanted to pick up again on the topic of writing with religious themes in mind. You know, it seems to me that religious experiences can be kind of corny on paper or on the screen, and they're very difficult, I think, to translate. They're not always these sophisticated, encounters. Sometimes they're sort of random and a little bit, I hate to use the word corny, but corny.
Right.
How do you possibly convey that? And is that why this is such a difficult topic to put on the screen or in books and novels?
Well, it is difficult. Think about this. For those who are very religious, they believe that God governs the universe and makes a real difference in the lives of people. And something like prayer matters and makes a difference. And yet, dramatically, that's one of the things that all writing teachers say never to do, is to have God solve the problem.
Right.
Called Deus ex machina, that here's a character in a crisis situation, and all of a sudden God reaches down, a miracle's performed, and it's all over. So there is a tension there that you have to try to, and you walk a very kind of fine line in that area. I think for me, the more interesting part is how a person deals with his own faith issues as he goes through a crisis, as he goes through the suspense of the story, because that's what fiction writing, I think good fiction writing really does, is it tests character. You take a character and you put them in this crucible of extraordinary circumstances, and it tests them. How are they going to handle it? Yeah.
Does it take a religious person to be able to write characters that, in a understandable way, that have these religious experiences?
Well, I'm not necessarily sure that's true, although it would be much harder perhaps for someone. It's like a research project, I guess. You would have to go in and understand how somebody lives and breathes and moves. And sometimes I see characters who are religious characters, quote unquote, in certain books, and they don't ring true at all. And I say, this person doesn't really understand, doesn't really know how a person like that thinks. So most of the people who write Christian fiction, for example, definitely are Christians because they understand that.
Now, I don't think you're a Muslim, but could you convincingly write a Muslim character? And if so, how would you do it?
I would have to really do my research. I would have to talk to Muslims. I would have to have someone walk me through their life. It would be a research project, but it can be done. And this is what writers do. They figure out what they need to know, hopefully, and do research, and then make that convincing. That's one of the things I like about writing fiction, is I get to learn new things. So I go out and try to find and do the research and visit the places and so on.
While we're on the topic of religion, how do you think a person's sort of philosophical or religious viewpoint affects the writing process? Does that ever enter your thinking?
I'm not sure that there's a correlation there. I have many friends who write books, and they are, some of them are strictly disciplined in the words they put down and the plotting they do and the outlines they make. And others are seat-of-the-pants writers, that they just wake up and they start writing and hope that things work out, and they usually do. So it's really more of a person-to-person difference than it is any philosophical difference.
Are you an organized writer? Do you go very systematically, or are you less so?
Well, I think I'm more on the organized side, but I like to allow for the story to breathe a little bit. I don't strictly adhere to an outline. I do outline my books somewhat, and I do try to foresee what's coming. But I do like to let the process unfold. It's just what I've come up with in my own career.
Now, you've been on both sides of this in terms of writing screenplays. What about the process of bringing a book to a screenplay? You've probably seen numerous examples of books that have become films. As an author, is that a painful thing to watch fellow authors go through, or what's your sense?
Well, again, that varies. Sometimes when an author sees his or her book turned into a screenplay and changed in a significant way, either characters or so on, because of what the film demands, it can be very jolting because they have nurtured a particular vision of a certain book. And sometimes great books turn into mediocre films, and sometimes books that were not so popular or critically acclaimed become fabulous movies. I think that's where the screenwriter and the director come in. They're the ones who are going to really marshal the thing into a visual format. So it's not any one thing.
And if your books were to become films, would you sort of insist on being the screenwriter for them, or would you hand it off to somebody?
Well, I would probably want to take the first shot at it because that's how I was trained, and I know what to do, and I know the characters. But I wouldn't be averse to having somebody else do it. But I think probably the best screenwriter for a James Scott Bell novel is James Scott Bell.
And when you're writing or looking back on your work, do you have actors in mind? Are you thinking like this would be perfect for Tom Cruise? Or
That's a great question, because when I teach writing, one of the things I tell people is before you write your character, you have to have a visual of them, and you have to be able to hear their voice. And what you can do is you can use any actor in history and cast that character, and the reader never has to know that. It's just that it's a visual for you. And sometimes I say it's fun to experiment by casting an actor of the opposite sex just to see what will happen. I wrote a book called Sins of the Fathers, and the lead character was a petite female defense lawyer. And as I was thinking, how does she talk, how does she sound, I started to imagine Joe Pesci from My Cousin Vinny playing this woman. Now, some really nice, interesting colors came out of that. But the readers don't know that because I don't describe her in that fashion. But that's just one of the tricks that fiction writers use.
now in Deadlock, how conscious of you or how aware of you were you of Sandra Day O'Connor? Obviously, I picked it up.
Well, obviously that was the motivating figure, the swing vote, a woman, right in the middle of the Supreme Court. But after that, I did not model my character on Justice O'Connor at all. It was a completely made-up character, but that was just kind of the starting point.
What about some future projects? What would you like to do, and any new paths or things you have planned, whether in any of these areas?
Well, I'm very happy to be doing what I'm doing. I'm contracted up. I'm writing these books. I know what's coming for the next couple of years, and I'm really concentrating on that. I was recently completed a screenplay that was a very satisfying experience, adapting a well-known novel to hopefully come to the screen soon. And I'm just very gratified to be doing this.
James Scott Bell, thanks for being my guest today.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. Join us next time for another edition of the Bully Pulpit Show. We'll see you then.